GameCube.
Alright, Aqua Twist, I'm very, very glad that you could join me today to witness the death of physical media in action.
Oh my god, no!
It was suffering on the deathbed for so many years now, and now it's finally being put out of its misery. How does that make you feel?
Oh my god, so there are so many news things that happened about it, and it's just like, I thought this was gonna be like mid-2030s at the very earliest, be like, okay, game key cards, you see that, but I didn't think like all the stuff going in our first topic with PlayStation. I thought that was gonna be way later than expected. Granted, there's certain like reasons in terms of production and economics right now causing it, but that's really heartbreaking. It's sad.
Yeah, so in case you haven't heard already, which if you're watching this, you probably already do, Sony announced that as of 2028 onwards, they're going to be cutting all physical production for the PlayStation 5 and onwards, meaning every first-party game, third-party game, indie game, everything. It's just going kaput, which
Yep.
is obviously not a good sign for physical collectors like you and I for multiple reasons.
Yeah, so I'm not a PlayStation person, but it's funny because it's like I call my dad because he's on vacation right now, and I was like, oh, how's it going? And the first thing he said was, dude, they're getting rid of PS5 physicals. If someone like him, who like doesn't game anymore, period, let alone plays on PlayStation, talk to me about it, you know it's bad. I keep underestimating how like huge this is. Because even though, like, even for a Nintendo-only person like myself, like, this is still, like, one of the big three cutting this. And I wouldn't be surprised if Xbox does the same shortly after.
And the funny thing is, like, yeah, because I don't blame your dad for knowing about it, just because mainstream news outlets rarely ever cover stuff that's happening in video games. I saw so many news stations that ended up talking about this, because, yeah, this is such a big deal. And I think the timing of it is it almost feels purposeful, because I think literally a week before, Rockstar announced that Grand Theft Auto 6 was not going to come on a disc at all. The physical version was just going to be a code in a box. And so I think Sony saw that and was like, hey, if one of the biggest games ever is going to be like, okay, we could do this, I think that's the sign where, okay, we could cut off supplies too.
You're telling me that, like, the game of the year, let alone probably game of the decade outside of Animal Crossing New Horizons, you're telling me that you're never going to own that? Like, that is a really bad sign. I feel like I don't really care for GTA, but I'll have to admit, like, this is probably going to be, like, where the industry is headed towards. Like, a lot of developers, indie and AAA, are looking at it, I would imagine, and be like, okay, if this game succeeds and makes money, we'll have to copy based on this. Hence why a lot of games, I would imagine, are skipping November release dates and, like, letting this game succeed.
Regardless of the circumstances surrounding it, like, you know, GTA 6 is inevitably gonna do well regardless. I know that it's not a game that I want to support because of all, like, the practices at play, whether it be, you know, the lack of a physical version, or the horror stories I've heard at Rockstar when it comes to, like, crunch time and everything.
God, yeah.
And I probably will never play the game regardless, because, like, regardless of everything going on surrounding it, I've just never cared about Grand Theft Auto. I've never played any of the games, and I don't really have a desire to. But this is less about me and more so, like, the industry as a whole, because yeah, if Sony gets away with this, and there's a chance they won't, because I've heard that they've been getting a lot of lawsuits right now because of trying to control a supposed monopoly surrounding the PlayStation Store.
Never heard of that. Like, I heard a little bits and pieces about the Sony stuff. I didn't hear about that one. That's crazy.
Yeah, no. I think especially because of everything going on right now, like the move to digital to be like one specific storefront, that means like they get full control of like literally everything, which is like a scary precedent for the industry. So today, and we tried to do a recording of this beforehand a while ago, and sort of did like an okay job explaining what we were talking about, but I feel like with everything that we've learned now, I think we could do a much better job talking about why physical media really does still matter to us and just way more people than you would think. But before we do get into that, I think we should probably explain why digital media has sort of become like the new wave for a lot of people, and like why is that such the prominent medium to consume video games now? So like what is your take on that?
I think there's a few reasons. I think, we're in our late 20s for context, the upper end of Gen Z. And a lot of us are like, uh-oh, it's time to move out, or getting ready to move out shortly. And we are thinking about space. That's why most stuff I buy is games. Because if I buy all figures, if I buy like giant things, crap, when I move out soon, I'm screwed. And a lot of people, like, I would imagine it's just like, oh, you buy it, like a game digital, you don't have to stress about finding a place for it. You don't have to stress about losing it. I've lost, like, Tomodachi Life, Animal Crossing New Leaf. I've lost a lot of stuff before, and I can understand, like, a lot of people wanting to not lose those things.
I think digital is, like, a matter of convenience more than anything. You don't have to worry about stuff taking up space. You don't have to worry about losing your game or getting it like stolen from like a bad faith actor and everything. In terms of like actually getting your game released, you don't have to worry about like manufacturing boxes or like the shipping costs and everything, which ultimately allows for a lot more creatives, especially in the indie space, to be able to get their game seen to the public, which ultimately has allowed a lot more games to be put out than there would be otherwise. You don't have to worry about like publishing or anything like that.
Okay, so for me, it's just like I went to game design college basically, and a couple of the studios already like publish their games on Steam. If we didn't have Steam, their games wouldn't exist. Like Goon Balloons DX, which is a great like arcade shooter, or like a roguelike Wobber. Games like Operation Haiti, like talking about like, representing like the Haitian Creole culture, which we don't really see in indie games too much, let alone AAA. Indie games allow us to fill this like niche or niches that like we don't really see in AAA, and it's really important that we keep having alternatives like itch.io, Game GOG, Epic Games Store. Like it's nice that we have multiple alternatives to release these games on. If it was just Steam, a lot of these developers, especially with the $100 application fee to submit these games, they'd be priced out. Like Celeste was released on itch.io before Steam, I believe. So like, it's really important to have like these platforms for indies to release their games on.
It is generally a net positive for like more games to like come out thanks to digital storefronts. Like, to put it into perspective, the Nintendo 64 had like 300 to like 400 games come out throughout its lifetime. Now that same amount of games comes out every single week on Steam. Now granted, most of those games are not going to be of quality, but regardless, they do still exist, which you wouldn't really see in like physical storefronts. So it is very good for them to be able to get their games out there that way, not to mention just easy for the consumer to like, oh, I buy this game, I get it immediately. I don't have to worry about traveling out to a store. I don't have to worry about making space for it and everything. And just, I don't have to worry about swapping cartridges or discs. It's always on my console, ready to be played and everything. And especially when you see stuff like Steam summer sales eventually, where the prices go down immensely, it's no wonder that so many people prefer buying games digitally than physically.
Exactly. A counterpoint to that I've been joking around in my videos lately is these are icons on a screen. And that kind of ties into our next topic about why physical media still matters. I get it, it's convenient, it's important to have this option, like if, especially let's say emulating, okay, whatever, like you can have these ROMs, you can have these files, but they're just files. They're icons. Stuff like this, or like when you go to a GameStop, you see these pieces of plastic on a shelf. I feel like physicality is an important part of human culture. I feel like even if we go into an all digital future, I feel like we're always gonna have physical items, period, like hand sanitizer or like phones. Like it's impossible to have a fully digital world as much as companies want us to believe that. And another thing is really that ownership and tangibility. right? Like with the game key cards, even though they're still physical, why a lot of people are upset about that, from what I've been seeing, is like, hey, you still have to download this. It's still an icon on a screen. Like, this isn't really a cartridge anymore. People want to be safe knowing that whatever they own is their own. You know, as a renter myself, it's like, this sucks. I want to own this, but I can't. I feel like people want to try to own as much as they can as possible. And I feel like physical media, be it a hardcore collector like a Minato Max, or like the average Joe like me, or like someone who's more casual about collecting, is like, both people still want to make sure that like whatever we play, we can play in 20 years.
And that's sort of the thing with digital media. It's not really a matter of ownership in most cases. Sure, you have platforms like Itch and GOG that like let you download the games without DRM and everything, but most platforms don't do that. They're essentially licenses that they can rip away from you at any time, which, granted, I haven't seen a lot of cases where that has actually happened. For the most part, you are safe, but there's always that chance that a company can like rip that license away from you. Even in like Sony's case, literally days before they announced that they would be going all digital, they ripped like over 500 different movies from people's collections on PlayStation.
Absolutely terrible. I mean, like, I personally just rent movies, or like I buy them physically, or like subscription services, but like I couldn't imagine like if you collect digitally, oh my god, I feel so bad. Even Amazon too. I would imagine Amazon probably had similar issues in the past. Like, you probably like buy from Amazon, they're like, uh-oh, we lost the license, sorry. Off your hard drive.
And that is sort of the tricky balance that, you know, it could easily happen to video games, especially in the case of games where they require an online connection in order to play. Like, you know, Anthem, for example. I'm pretty sure that game got shut down not too long ago. And it's why movements like Stop Killing Games has, you know, become as popular as they are, because people are sick and tired of all this happening. And this isn't stuff that you see nearly as often in the physical game space, because once you have the disc, once you have the cartridge, that's pretty much it. Like, you're the one that has the game, and you can do whatever you want with it after you buy it. And in special cases, depending on like the console, you'd be able to dump it onto like a PC in order to make sure it's properly preserved that way. And I think that's what's really important about physical media, making sure that this copy of this game is always available for generations to come, so that we don't have to worry about the publishers doing anything with them or changing anything about them. And that was always the case up until like the 7th generation of gaming, when, you know, more games started requiring stuff like online on the PS3 and Xbox 360. And then we started to see stuff like, you know, day one patches and everything, required downloads in the case of some physical games, that make the future seem really scary, because like, oh, I buy this copy of a game, say generations from now, I'm not gonna be able to experience it the way that it was intended to, which is the very unfortunate reality of like digital media, because when these storefronts shut down, assuming these games don't get re-released somewhere else, they're essentially lost media.
Yeah, I remember like I made a video years ago talking about, it was like fresh after the eShops were shut down on the Wii U and 3DS and everything, and it's just like, people are like, oh, you can mod it, it's so easy. Yeah, but like, what if my kid in like 20 years gets a 3DS from a retro game store, is like, uh-oh, I can't play Harmonite, or I can't play Rhythm Heaven Megamix legally on my US 3DS or something. And it's just like, there are ways to do it, but it's like, removing these stores means it's much more difficult for the average consumer to be able to get these games. Like, I have a Discord friend, like, she wanted to play Megamix, but she doesn't have like that download. How would she know how to emulate, you know? It's just like, that's a big thing. Another thing I want to talk about is like core memories and preservation, as you were discussing earlier. I went to too many games last weekend, and one of the biggest games I wanted to buy was Chibi-Robo. That is a game that got added to Nintendo Switch Online around the launch of the Switch 2. And I wanted to buy it because even though it was very expensive, I really like that game because it's unique. I don't really see a lot of games, let alone Nintendo games like it. And I'm like, I want to make sure that I can remember this experience. instead of an icon within an icon of a screen. It's buried within the GameCube NSO. I have an actual box I can pull off the shelf, and here you go. I know, like, it may be $100, but I can touch it, I can smell it, I can just look at it and admire it. Like, that's a big thing. And I've heard a lot of people talk about, like, oh, I want to preserve games, and they just, like, collect a lot of crap. That's not the case with me. I feel like I want to respect preservation. It's like, no, I don't just buy it to own it to leave on the shelf, but it's because I've played it before, I've experienced it, and I want to, like, retain the memory. It would be cool. It's cool to see actual libraries allow you to rent and borrow games from there, because it's just like, it's a place where it's like, you don't have to be constantly buying these games anymore. You can just go to a public place and see video games alongside books and movies. And it goes to show you that it's just like, video games now are probably as important, if not more so, when you think of media as, once again, books and TV shows and movies, which have been pre-established for like decades or hundreds of years.
That's another thing, because when it comes to that core memory thing, yeah, I can just be able to, like, play the game off of NSO in the case of Chibi-Robo. And in my case, yeah, I probably will, just because the average person is not gonna pay like $200 just to play like an old copy of a game that they can get with their subscription. And subscriptions are like another thing entirely and everything. But, like, I totally understand where you're coming from when it comes to, like, that core memory thing. Because, like, when a game's just an icon on a screen, that lack of physicality means that in most cases you weren't really going to have, like, a core memory of where you were when you got the game, sharing it with, like, you know, maybe like your family members or your future kids and everything. And, like, looking through like a box of like old memories like that, you can't really do that with digital media nearly that much. Like, I could tell you exactly where I was in a lot of cases with a lot of the games that I got, and it brings back like good memories, where getting like a digital copy, you know, it's not really the same thing, just because, like, oh, I purchased it off the eShop, gotta wait for it to download. And in the case of video games, yeah, when you're talking about other mediums, video games arguably feel like the most important thing to be preserving right now. And the reason why is because every video game ever made is tied to a specific piece of hardware, and as such needs to be able to compromise and adapt in order to be able to run on that piece of hardware. Even in the case of backwards compatibility, where you go from the Switch 1 to Switch 2, there's layering that's involved and makes it so each game has to be able to be optimized in order to run that console. With other mediums, you don't have to worry about that anymore. You could get like every single movie you could ever want downloaded onto an external hard drive, and the experience is gonna be exactly the same as you would if you had it on like a Blu-ray or a DVD. And the same thing applies to like music and books and stuff. Now, of course, there are people out there that prefer the physical media of those aspects. There's a lot of vinyl collectors out there. I mean, the success of Taylor Swift's albums alone are enough to justify that. But in the case of video games, that physical media is like so important because of the fact that they are run on specific pieces of hardware that you cannot just adapt to any other format, like, you know, your average CD or DVD, even pieces of paper in the case of books.
Yeah, exactly. One other thing is consumer rights. So I remember seeing a post from Gamefly talking about like, oh, we're still committed to like allowing people to rent games for like such a low cost. And it's like, years ago I thought like, oh, why would I do that? And it's just like, in hindsight, it's just like, especially with where things are going, it's like, man, I want to play Indiana Jones on Switch 2. My library by my work has it. I can rent it. I can borrow it. I can still experience that, and I can take it off the shelf. I don't have to be like, oh, I have to wait for a sale. Oh, I have to pay that like $70, $50, whatever. No, it's just like, there are ways to like essentially get these things. Also, trade-ins. At too many games, not all the vendors, but a good chunk of them is just like, hey, you can trade in stuff you don't care about anymore. It's like, if you want to be more of a curated collector, which I'm going to go into later in this discussion, it's just like, you can take your old crap and get it for a good deal. Again, like with Chibi-Robo, you know, it's like, I took stuff that I don't personally care about, like, and trade in for something I do care about. It's like, if you do that for digitals, it's like, well, shoot, Am I going to get rid of, like, I don't know, Call of Duty from like 20 years ago on my Steam hard drive to get the new one? No, you can't do that. It's so much more flexible with physical media, being able to allow you to trade in and rent these games, and there's more competitive pricing too, especially like during Black Friday and holiday sales.
It's funny you mentioned Indiana Jones in particular because I have that game on standby, actually. From what I played of it, it is really good. If you haven't played it, I really do recommend it. But yeah, that really is like another thing, because like in an all-digital future, the publishers have all the rights in the world in order to keep the game's price as high as possible. Say for example, God of War Ragnarok is a game that Sony can still easily sell on the PlayStation Store for $60. Meanwhile, if you go out to physical storefronts, whether it be on the PS4 or PS5, you can find that game for like 20 or 30 bucks now. Unless you're Nintendo, in which case the price is gonna be at $60 forever and ever.
So, in terms of what's next and everything, I already alluded to this earlier and in my game keycard video, but I want to coin this term of like the Rentaissance. It was like, oh my god, all these apartments being built up, buildings being destroyed, malls being destroyed, stores being destroyed. You got like digital and like stuff being taken away, like Overwatch 2, and that's the thing, is just like there is this like a new era of like company greed and like wanting people to basically not know what they're getting into. Hence the game key cards being like, oh wait, crap, are we buying a license? Are we really still owning these digital games? Another thing I've noticed on YouTube, a trend, is history being secular. We're in the cycle of like, okay, we have this like new format, it's great, it kind of dies down, we go back, and we're going into digital. Digital's great. Uh-oh, there's cons and now it's bad. Now we're going back to physical. I've noticed a lot of people being like going back to 2000s media or like VHS tapes or only using technology from the era. And I think that's a big thing, especially with cutting streaming. And I know like the Spawncast podcast recently talked about like, oh, Xbox could be like a streaming box in the future with different prices.
Under services for Microsoft, they do make a brief mention of cloud, and they say to try to make cloud play feel native, fast, and reliable across TVs and low-cost devices. I still think they're looking at that as an entry point, and I do wonder if the thing we don't know is that they have that Keystone project running again, and they're gonna release like $100 box next to the $1,200 Helix.
When they announce that, people are gonna be like, F that, screw that, no, like, we already have Disney Plus, I already have Netflix, I don't want to pay another subscription.
And that's funny you mentioned streaming services in particular too, because in the case of video games, it almost feels like a lost cause, because like when you have a subscription like Netflix or Disney Plus and everything, with movies, or in the case of like music with like Spotify and like Tidal and stuff, it's easy to see like movies and like music is pretty like, I don't think disposable is the right word, but like consuming is like very easy. There's no barrier to entry when it comes to that type of thing, so you can leave stuff on the background, you can binge through a lot of stuff, it's really easy. With video games, you can't really do that, especially with a lot of games being like, you know, 20 or 30 plus hours and everything. You kind of need to dedicate like an entire weekend or like a full week in general in order to play a game like that. So like in the case of a subscription service, unless you're constantly playing games all the time, especially in the case of cloud streaming where it's like your connection is like based on the cloud, you're not really gonna get much out of that. At that point, you might as well just buy the full game, which, you know, with physical outlets like mom and pop stores or your Barnes and Noble and everything, where people going back to get like physical copies of games, that's obviously one of the best places you can possibly do that sort of thing.
One thing I was just thinking of too is like too many games. I think one big thing I learned, like, okay, I've been to PAX many times. I think seeing all the vendors made me realize like how much demand there is for retro games specifically. As I said before, with it going back to cutting streaming and everything, a lot of people are like, I don't want to deal with this complications. I want to go back to my older systems. I've done that myself. Like I played Lego Batman on Xbox. I played Chibi-Robo on GameCube, or like Resident Evil 4 on Wii and stuff like that. Also, one thing I just thought of too is like, I feel like a lot of companies are making these decisions with a lot of first world countries in mind, which makes sense. But what if, let's say, you're in a third world country with limited internet access or limited water resources or something, right? They want to be able to play games, but they're struggling to keep the lights on because of outside factors they can't control. And you're telling me their only way of playing games is through a crappy cloud gaming service connection? These physical games are probably the only way they can play them. And taking that away is just unacceptable.
And that leads into the point where a lot of physical games aren't even really physical games at this point, especially in the case of the Switch 2 with the whole game key card thing, which is basically you do get a physical cartridge of a game, but instead of the data just being readily available on the cartridge, it just activates the Nintendo eShop in order to download the game off the internet and be able to store it onto your hard drive in order to actually run the game. Now, you don't need an internet connection after that, but you do for the installation process. Now, we kind of saw this already with PlayStation and Xbox. With the PS4 and Xbox One, a lot of games, the data was still on the disc, but you still needed to have the data for the game installed onto the console itself, which that alone I am fine with. I don't have as much of an issue with that, because it's annoying it takes up the hard drive space, but you don't need an internet connection for the game to work. Whereas with these game key cards, or these installation things that, you know, Sony and Microsoft have been doing for other games, you do need that. So that means, like, when these storefronts go down someday, granted, in Nintendo's case, I mean, you could still re-download games off the Wii Shop channel, for one. So, like, the fear of these games being lost media, I think we're only gonna have to worry about decades from now. But that's the thing. This medium has been around for 4 decades already, over 4 decades. Say, like, 4 decades later, we can't access these servers, we can't play these games anymore. That's the big fear when it comes to these things.
Yeah, that's another thing too, is like a counterpoint to physical media that I've seen a lot of arguments about and a lot of stuff on the rise is cartridge errors. You got disc rot with like the PlayStation 1 era and sometimes like GameCube era or PS2 era discs, or cartridges just straight up just not working because they're too old, like, you know, let's say like Atari cartridges or NES ones. Or I've heard more recently about 3DS games, like apparently they were so rushed in terms of production, it's like a lot of the save data batteries just stopped working and those games could be lost. But again, there are resources out there to preserve those games and dump the ROM so you can still access those physical cartridges data without needing that itself. But that is a really big important counterpoint to physical media, is that like all things, they have the potential to break, whereas digital icons on a screen, they probably don't.
And that's, I think, one of the big things for a lot of people, especially like even with older media. I've seen cases where people will sell their entire collection of Wii games and then just get a bunch of ROMs and store them on a USB drive and just play the games that way. I'm obviously not gonna tell you where you could do stuff like that, of course. We can argue all we want about how piracy is an excellent way to preserve games, everything, and I agree with you, but you're acting like the general public knows how to do that. Of course, you know, in some cases, especially in the case of stuff like the Wii and the 3DS, it is pretty easy to do, but with many other consoles, like say, I don't know, the PS4, for example, it's not. And that does leave a lot of concerns, and why, especially in the case of physical media, it is really important to have these options, especially in the case where a game gets delisted and you can't get it digitally anymore. Like Yakuza 0 is a perfect example of that. I've talked about this on my channel before, where they removed the digital version of the game to make way for the what many consider the inferior director's cut version, which that version is even available on the PS4 and Xbox One. So you're kind of screwed if you only have those consoles and only buy games digitally. If you don't get the physical version, you're kind of out of luck in that regard. So yeah, it is frustrating how physical media, especially these days, it could be scalped, it could be overcharged depending on the demand of a game. But the fact of the matter is, these are readily available versions that'll be readily available in the foreseeable future, regardless of what publishers decide to do, and that is something that I think is really, really important to keep around so they don't have full control over the market.
Definitely. What's nice about Square Enix, for example, a nice counterpoint to that is Final Fantasy VII Remake on Switch 2. I believe if you buy it digitally, I don't know if they still do it anymore, they gave you the digital copy of the original game. You can still easily buy the original Final Fantasy VII. And debate all you want about which is better, but like I think for the legacy and why it's important to preserve these games, having the original versions alongside the remakes and newer ones, Ocarina of Time being a great example. No matter what happens with this new remake, people can easily go back to the original game, be it on Nintendo Classics, on the 3DS, on the N64 cartridge. So it's really important to view remakes as a companion piece. And that's what's really nice about these physical versions is you can always go back to how they were originally designed.
Yeah, because it's very rare these days for like an older game to get a physical re-release. You'll see every now and then, like with Mario Galaxy 1+2 getting remade. Later this year, we're getting like a collection of old Toy Story games available physically. Even on Switch 2, it's not game key cards, which is a miracle. But it's very few and far between you see older games get that re-release like that. And especially with failing hardware, you know, it's why a lot of fan-made PC ports have become really popular. I seen it happen recently with Donkey Kong 64, for example. And so, yeah, that is like a really nice thing to be able to have both those options, especially when the publishers actively encourage that. Like with Capcom, for example, they have a remake of Resident Evil 4 readily available, but the original version is still available to purchase even on these modern platforms.
Speaking of game key cards, we wanted to pose the question, are game key cards really that bad? I'm going to be honest, as someone who mainly collects Nintendo nowadays, let's say when I move out, that's going to be my system. I don't care about PlayStation or Xbox, whatever. For me, as someone who would rather have a physical representation of these games and having some form of cartridge, I think they're fine. I think games like Final Fantasy VII Remake, for example, every game in the trilogy is going to be impossible to fit on a normal cartridge. I'd rather have it on my shelf than not because they're probably going to be some of my favorite games of all time. I don't know. But on the flip side, you have a digital download for such a small game like Pac-Man World 2, Puyo Puyo Tetris 2S. I forget which one. I think it was like the Sky Mayhem. That was like a 2 GB download apparently. Like stuff like that. I think that is a bit disappointing. Hopefully within the future when they do have more cartridge sizes available, then maybe we can see where it goes. But especially if Sony doesn't backpedal and is like, no, we're sticking to it. We're not making any more physicals anymore. I think people are going to look to game key cards and apologize and be like, wow, I mean, it's better than nothing. We'll just buy game key cards.
That's the funny thing too, because especially with Sony's announcement, I look at game key cards now and I'm like, I still don't like this, obviously. It almost feels like they actually made it sort of seem like a good deal in a way, which is like very funny to me. The problem is, like I said, you know, the storefronts could eventually end up shutting down. These cartridges will eventually feel like e-waste. And, you know, a lot of people do argue it's just the worst of physical and digital. And I did agree for a time. At the same time, though, at the very least, with a game key card, because it's a cartridge that is not tied to your account, at the very least, you have the right to be able to get rid of it. Because you infamously, you know, I mean, Steam does this kinda, but like in most cases, it's very difficult to get a refund or to be able to get rid of a digital game should you not want it anymore, should it not work properly. With a game key card, you at least have the opportunity to like get your money back should a game not work properly, or you're just like, oh, I'm done with this game, I don't ever really want to play it again. You at least have that safety net. And another thing I've seen in defense in game key cards cases is, especially in terms of loading times and storage size and everything, the Final Fantasy VII Remake you mentioned a while back is a perfect example of that. Not only is that game around like 90 gigabytes, I think Rebirth is like 100, Revelation will probably be even more. The fact that it won't be able to fit on a regular cartridge, it feels like a necessary evil, and Square Enix does say that the game just generally runs better, especially in the case of loading times and everything, by having all the data natively stored onto the console compared to running it off of the disc or the cartridge. So that is one thing a game key card can benefit from. But most of the time, especially in the cases of like other major third parties, it feels much more like a general scapegoat rather than actually just... It just feels like an instant money saver, because like that stuff is like much easier and faster to produce than like a proper cartridge with all the data stored on it.
Absolutely. So the big question that we had to wrap everything in a nice bow, would you buy an all digital console? If game key cards are the half step to Nintendo's fully digital console, would you fully buy a digital console? I would say no. A lot of people have been talking about, oh my god, PS6 is going to be like $1,000 because of parts. Wait a minute, there's going to be no disc drive. So because of that, I think I would absolutely not do that. Unless if there's a game and it's like, oh man, I really wish I could have that, like a Galaxy 3 or like a new Chibi-Robo game or like, I don't know, like something insane. I just feel like if once Nintendo makes an all digital console, I feel like by that age, I'm going to be wanting to catch up on my backlog anyway. So or like a Steam machine, which is over $1,000 thing, I would say absolutely not.
For me, it's very, very tricky because I'm someone that's not a complete ride or die when it comes to physical media. I'm not gonna be like, oh, I will never buy a game if it's not on the cartridge or the disc. If I'm being totally honest with myself, I would say half of my library is digital media at this point. One of the most recent examples, I just picked up Devil May Cry 5 on the Switch 2. That's only a digital release, and that game runs spectacularly on the Switch 2. I've been loving what I've played of it so far. And like, there are cases where it's like, if the deal's really good, if it runs better, like let's say for example Pac-Man World 2 repack and everything. The Switch 1 version, that has the full game on the cartridge, but it's not going to run nearly as well as the Switch 2 version of the game. That's a game key card. So do I just spring for that, or do I just get that digitally to get that like much smoother experience? But if you're asking me, digital is something that I feel like should always be an option rather than the only thing. Not only for the consumer right to choose what they want to have, but also in general, just again, to make sure these companies don't always have so much control over this stuff. For me, I'm just someone that likes to display a lot of what I really like. I'm someone who I will look at a game like Kirby Air Riders, for example, and like, this game means so much to me. I want to share this with people. I want to display that on my shelf and everything. Sony, Microsoft, if they could get away with it, they absolutely will. Nintendo, I feel like, is definitely going to be a bit more stubborn. I think they are still leaning into it, but like, I'm kind of at a point where it's like, if the console is going to be all digital, I think I'm at a point where I'm just done, which sounds sad to me, but like at the same time, one, if I'm gonna get like all digital anyway, I might as well just keep gaming on PC. Objectively speaking, that's gonna have the most stuff out of any other platform. That's gonna be interesting because publishing on consoles is always much harder than a PC. But also just in general, I have such a huge backlog of masterpieces just readily available to me that I just like, I could go the rest of my life never buying another video game, and I still feel like I would find something new to play. And look, maybe that's really easy for me to say, considering I just got my dream game last year, but I feel like I would still feel this way even if Kirby Air Riders wasn't a thing that happened. To me, it feels like a lot of companies just see video games as just disposable, whereas like for us, and I like to think a lot of other people too, even those that mostly buy digitally, they are stuff that matter. They're stuff that influences our lives for the greater good in so many instances. It's just sad to me that a lot of people just don't see it that way, which is why, digital media has sort of become the wave. So I'm hoping, especially with that Rentaissance you were talking about earlier, we can see the market start to shift towards physical media becoming the thing. And, you said in your last video, physical for life. This game is my wife. If Sony's gonna force me to go through a divorce, I'm gonna go ahead and just end my life before that divorce. How about that, Sony? I hope you like that. You have ruined a good marriage because of what you did to physical media, and I hope that you take that to your grave.
That's a great point to end on, Matthew. Thank you for having me. I'm Aqua Twist. I talk a lot about game preservation on my channel, the UI of games, looking and dissecting into their menus and everything. And I love collecting, not just to have it, but just to like own a memory of what makes a game special. So thank you for watching, and remember, your life is your own.
Until physical media dies, in which case his life will be dead. Sony, the blood is on your hands!